Hello and welcome to Purpose, Passion and Grit. I'm Humphrey Hawksley, your host for the next hour on this Goldster show, where we talk to people who, against all the odds, have overcome incredible obstacles and stand as an example to us all. If we ever think a mountain is too high, think again. On the social media for today's guests, a comment came in from someone who, by a hair's breadth, it seemed, escaped what happened to him. I could easily have faced his challenges, the comment said. My mother took thalidomide, but I've never achieved as much as he has, full of admiration. Yes, we are going to talk about the scandal of the pregnancy drug thalidomide and of its survivors. My guest, waiting so politely and patiently, tackled his challenges head on. Born in 1962, he has severely shortened arms, malformed hands, a missing right eye, and severely impaired vision in the left eye. In fact, he was registered blind at the age of 3. Nevertheless, and this is a massive nevertheless, he overcame all of that to become a senior BBC editor working in news, the Today and other current affairs programs, including from our own correspondent. He has taught journalism in Africa and Asia. And take it from me, he has an eagle eye for the sloppy sentence and a razor-sharp mind to give clarity to fuzzy prose. He is now a great campaigner for charities, particularly, of course, revolving around thalidomide. So without further ado, welcome Geoff Adam Spinks to Goldster, Purpose, Passion and Grit.
Thank you, Humphrey. Lovely to be here.
It's great. Now, given your eagle eye for editing, was there anything sloppy in my work there? I worked very hard on it, knowing I was going to come up against you.
I couldn't spot anything. I mean, I don't know whether Therese Coffey would have a problem with an Oxford comma here or there. I'm not sure, but no, it passed muster as far as I'm concerned.
That's it. It's good training from you in those days, all those years back. Now, tell us, what exactly was thalidomide?
Okay, thalidomide was the supposed answer to a problem. The problem was, in post-war Europe, there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who were experiencing what we would now call PTSD. They'd been through a hell of a lot during the Second World War, displacement, bombings, seeing the deaths of close family. And so they were mentally traumatized. And the calming pill of choice in those days was barbiturates. Now, barbiturates are very dangerous because if you happen to pop a couple too many, you can put yourself over the edge quite quickly and overdose. The overdosing with barbiturates is quite often accidental and fatal. So the search was on for a safe sedative. And a German company, a small German company called Chemie Grünenthal, came up with what they thought was the answer to this question. They decided they had developed a wonder drug. And in their rush to get this wonder drug to market, they bypassed a lot of the due diligence that some of the bigger pharma companies like Roche would have gone through, like testing the drug on pregnant mammals, for example. And the drug produced what are charmingly known as teratogenic effects, in other words, monster-inducing effects. And babies started to be born with missing limbs or missing ears, or like me, a missing eye. And it didn't take that long, although Grünenthal, of course, initially denied that it was anything to do with their wonder drug because they could see pound, dollar, or Deutschmark signs in their eyes. And they wanted to keep on rushing to get this drug out there. But the evidence was stacking up. And in the end, in December 1961, the drug had to be withdrawn because it was definitely that drug that was causing the birth defects.
Yes. Yeah. So it was a sort of mothers took it in order to sort of make their pregnancy much easier. And I just want to say, if anybody's got any experience with thalidomide, wonders about it, got any questions about it, ask Geoff, and Geoff will answer them. And if he needs a drink of water, he might leave the screen suddenly because he has to bend over and get it. But don't worry about that. Everything will be absolutely fine. So you were one of the later births, were you? If you say in 61 it was withdrawn, you were on the cusp of that. Your mother was taking it during her pregnancy.
Yes, that's right. And I have to say, it was mainly marketed as a sedative. The fact that it was given to pregnant women in some cases to calm morning sickness was almost a secondary use. The main use was as a sedative. But they did find that it reduced the sort of early morning nausea that some women experience.
Okay.
My mother took one pill, and if you take the one pill of thalidomide at exactly the wrong time, you can do untold damage to your unborn child. I suspect that if you took it regularly over the period of the first trimester of pregnancy, you would end up damaging the baby so much that it would result in miscarriage. And we sort of assume that the best scientific guess says that something like 9 out of 10 of the babies damaged by thalidomide were never reached full term or died just after birth.
And so your mother took it in order to ease a pregnancy sickness or something, or just because she had a headache and wanted to calm down?
She took it because her father had just died, and she had weeks and weeks and weeks of sleepless nights. And in the end, in desperation, she decided, okay, I'll take this sedative. I'll take one of these sedatives that had, of course, had been prescribed by the doctor. So who is going to question what the doctor gives them? Now people do, but back then people didn't.
Yes. And there's one thing that maybe it wasn't questioned, is you said this drug was never tested on a mammal, you said, but not even on a human being or a mammal.
I mean, of course, you can't really test drugs on pregnant women I mean, it wouldn't be ethical, but normally the big pharma companies, even at that time in the mid-50s when thalidomide was being developed, would have tested on pregnant rabbits. And subsequently, it has been found that the birth defects, the birth anomalies, I think is the current preferred term, are reproduced if you feed the drug to pregnant mammals at the right stage of pregnancy.
They
didn't do that.
But nowadays, when new drugs come out, even the COVID vaccine, you can sign up for a trial, can't you, at your own risk? You might get paid for it. So most drugs are tested on humans, aren't they now?
Yes, there are human trials, but of course, you wouldn't normally test it on a pregnant woman.
Yeah, or somebody who's vulnerable and likely to fall down. How many survivors like yourself are there of thalidomide in Britain?
In the UK, there are something like 438, I think, is the current count of survivors.
Yeah, and how many were born?
In the UK, upwards of 5, perhaps as many as 600 were born, and of course, over time, gradual natural attrition has meant that we've lost people along the way.
Yeah.
And most of us are in our 60s already, so that would be normal.
Looking very suave in your 60s, I might say, Geoff, and the spectacles become you.
Thank you, Humphrey. You don't look so bad yourself.
We'll go through you more than me, but going back to the early 60s. How old were you when you realized something wasn't quite right?
I think the fact that I was sent away to boarding school instead of attending local schools like my brothers and sisters did was a huge indicator. And of course, when I questioned this, my mum and dad said, "Oh, well, we have to do this. We've been told we have to do this. The local authority says you wouldn't be safe in the local school, blah, blah, blah." And of course, when I went to school, there were lots of other kids with different disabilities. So I think gradually the penny drops that you're not standard issue. But I think I became more aware of thalidomide in the early 70s because I've always been aware. I've always been an avid news junkie, even as a sort of child of 9 or 10. and you couldn't really avoid it. It was all over the news, it was all over the papers, and it was all over the broadcast media.
Just remind us how that story broke.
Well, the Sunday Times, under its wonderful editor, later Sir Harry Evans, decided that a huge injustice was about to happen, that the families of the thalidomide children, as we then were about to be royally done over by distillers biochemicals, which later became Guinness, which later became Diageo, which is the world's now the largest drinks company in the world. They were about to get royally done over, and Diageo, or in its previous guise, distillers, were about to settle for about £2 or £3 million. And Harry Evans said, well, £2 or £3 million divided by that number of families is a pittance, and actually what these people need is serious help. And so he campaigned, and week after week after week after week in the Sunday Times, they featured the stories of different families, and they pushed the lawyers, and they pushed the medics, and they pushed the company. And in the end, to cut a long story short, distillers settled for about 20 million in the early 70s.
Okay,
which was about 10 times what they were prepared to settle for. And it was only after being publicly shamed by Harry and the Insight team at the Sunday Times that happened.
Were you featured in that? Was your family profiled at all?
No, actually we weren't. My mum was very publicity shy. I think, like a lot of mothers, like a lot of parents, they felt very uneasy about thalidomide. They felt, and I'm sure my mother went to her grave feeling immense guilt because she'd actually swallowed the pill that caused you can imagine. And it doesn't matter how many times you told my mum, okay, listen, mum, this wasn't your fault. It was a bunch of very greedy people who rushed a drug to the market to make a lot of money, and it wasn't safe, and they kind of probably knew, but they didn't withdraw it until the last minute. Didn't matter how many times I said that, she would always think, yes, but I did the swallowing of the tablet, and that this is the result. So I think my mum didn't want a big hoo-ha because she felt ashamed.
And did she ever reconcile on that one?
I don't think she did. I really don't think she did. I interviewed her. I did an archive hour for Radio 4 in the early 2000s, and I asked her if I could interview her, and she said yes, that would be fine. We had to stop the interview a couple of times because she broke down, and I said to her, look, we don't need to do this. We can stop this right now. And she said, no, this is really important. I need to tell you this story. And I need, to share this story with other people because it's important. And so she soldiered on. I got a bit of stick from my siblings, I have to say, about that, because they thought I'd pushed her too hard, but she was the one pushing herself.
Take us back to then. You're 5 years old, and you're sent away. But before that, did you did you know that you couldn't see properly, that your arms weren't right? I mean, do you have a first memory of questioning that?
Yes, I do remember that, and I remember my dad, bless him. My dad was an engineer, and so from his perspective, I was a problem to be solved. So he was always developing gadgets and gizmos to help me. And he made me this sort of foam rubber band that went around my head, so that when I fell, I didn't do damage to my head, because of course when I fall, I can't stop the fall by putting my arms out to stop me.
Yeah.
So he would make me wear this horrible thing. It made me, even back then, I knew it made me look like a twit. I knew it wasn't right. It looked horrible, and I would rather have gashed my forehead than be seen in public with this horrible thing around my head. So it was things like that made me realize, okay, there aren't lots of other kids wandering around with these funny things around their heads to stop them hurting themselves when they fall. So yes, there's something a bit different about me.
Yeah, and your siblings, give us they're older, younger?
I'm the youngest of four.
Right.
And my sister said that when I arrived in the family, as it were, she was 5, and then my brother's 11 years older, and my other sister is 13 years older. She said it was like a nuclear explosion in the family. Nothing was ever the same after that. And I think my parents had to suddenly put all of their emotional, in some cases financial and other resources towards supporting me, to their detriment, to be honest. And I think it, you know, I think I'm lucky, because I know in a lot of cases, lovely Irish lady, Sadie Galvin, who is no longer with us, she gave birth to Dominic, who had multiple disabilities and you know, had seizures several times a day. And her husband came home and said, well, either he goes or I go. And she said, well, let me pack your bag for you then.
Yeah. Because the attention was all on you, who needed that attention. And how did that relationship with your siblings evolve over the years as you became adults?
I think over the years as we became, I mean, to be honest, we've never sat down and had a proper sort of clearing of the air about it. Of course, they don't blame me, because I didn't ask to be born, and, you know, I didn't ask to be born with these kind of impairments. But I think to a greater or lesser extent, they were a bit sort of put out by the way my parents, you know, focused so much attention in a laser-like fashion on making sure that I was supported and had the resources I needed.
This is quite a common situation, I think, as you mentioned, with when you have one child with a disability and other healthy siblings. But take us to your boarding school aged 5. How did that work through your education?
The boarding school aged 5 was, as far as I'm concerned, the baseline. I mean, of emotional desperation. If I look back on it, I can't remember since ever feeling so lost, bereft, unhappy, miserable. Okay, I'll tell you a story. And I've written the first chapter of I've written 7 chapters of my memoir. We'll come to that later. It hasn't yet been finished. Of course, it hasn't yet been published. But the scene I open with in my memoir is getting out of bed, aged 5, at my boarding school. And I can't tell you why I did this even now, but I removed my pajamas and defecated on the floor every morning for about a week. And it sent the staff completely crazy. I can only imagine that it was my body or my brain's way of expressing the profound trauma of being sort of whisked away from a loving family and plonked in an institution.
And nobody explained to you why you were there? Sat down and said, look, or did they visit? How did all that work?
I wasn't allowed to see my parents for the first 4 weeks.
Goodness.
Yeah. Because they said that would be the most helpful thing. Yeah. You know, things changed. You wouldn't do that now. You just wouldn't do that. And then my parents were allowed to come one Saturday in every 3 to take me out for the afternoon and then return me. And then but you know, Humphrey, I was one of the lucky ones, because this school was run by NCH, what used to be called the National Children's Homes. There were only 48 kids at the school of varying ages from 5 up to 18, quite profoundly disabled, all of them really. And some of them hadn't the means or hadn't parents who would take them home for the holidays. So they were there 52 weeks of the year. I was one of the sort of the royalty, the people whose parents turned up religiously every 3rd Saturday and at the end of term and took them home.
Yes, good. And did you understand that you were one of the lucky ones then?
I absolutely did. I
Yeah.
did. Absolutely. Yes. Yes. Yes.
So you had the sort of trauma of that isolation or and loneliness on the one side, but also you knew that there was a beacon of a loving family on the other.
Yes, I did. And that I never lost that sort of, once I'd gotten over I'd say those first 4 weeks when I didn't see my parents were the hardest 4 weeks of my whole life up to now.
Yeah.
But once I'd begun to get used to the rhythm and the regular 3 weekly visits and stuff, I realized that I was extremely fortunate compared with some of my contemporaries. And I can tell you that there are plenty of stories among the thalidomide community of parents being told when their child was born, look, leave this child here at hospital. It will go into the state system. Go home, forget all about it, go and make another one.
Goodness. And they
That
would,
was the medical orthodoxy back then.
and there are survivors that went through that were, so they never knew who their parents were.
They either didn't know who their parents were, or they saw them once in a blue moon, or yeah.
Goodness.
There was an institution called Chaley Heritage, which I know my mum scoped out and decided I wasn't going to go there. She wasn't happy to send me away, but she was certainly going to be very picky about where she sent me away to. And there were kids at Chaley Heritage who'd been there from the age of 2 weeks old.
Goodness.
Yeah.
Goodness. Yes. Yes. That's Chaley Heritage is in Sussex, isn't it?
It absolutely is. Yes, it
Yeah.
is in Sussex.
Yes, that is. Just to, I want to move on to your stellar career in a moment, but Jennifer asks, I thought thalidomide was tested on rats. Is that not correct?
Actually, it was tested on mice, but not pregnant mice.
Right. Okay.
They did what's called a jiggle test, where they suspended a cage of animals over some kind of bath of this chemical sort of bubbling up to see what effect it would have. But they didn't induce the drug in pregnant mammals, not ever.
No. Okay. But they could have done.
Of course, they could have done.
Yeah, they could have. They just didn't, to save money and to get it through. And I guess the maxim is the less tests you do, the better results you're going to have.
They were already receiving reports of negative side effects on people who were taking the drug. They received reports of a condition called peripheral neuritis, which is a sort of numbness and tingling in the extremities, which is irreversible. And they refused to believe even that. And that would have been enough on its own to get them to withdraw the drug and do further testing before it was readmitted to the market. And they chose to ignore those reports.
I mean, it's making my blood boil just listening to you, Geoff. We'll move on in a moment. If anybody's got any questions about disability, because Geoff was once, for a long time, the disability correspondent for the BBC. Disability in the UK, the thalidomide particularly, the struggles, the challenges that he has overcome. Jean Joyce is saying here, attitudes to disability was terrible in the 50s and 60s. Yeah, you were born into, whereas Chaley Heritage is now held up as one of the great sort of education schools for the special needs children. So they've sort of turned a corner, I guess there. So you're at the boarding school right through your education, or did you come out at time to do your A levels or O levels and that sort of thing?
Well, I was at the first school, which was in the Cotswolds in Chipping Norton. I was there for 3 years, and there were only 4 classes in the entire school. And by the age of 7, I was already in the third of the four classes. And I think they said to my parents, we can't provide Geoff with what he needs. I think they operated benignly, but they operated under this sort of soft bigotry of low expectation. So they occupied the kids and taught them a bit to read and write and paint and whatever. But there wasn't really much emphasis on academic achievement. And they said, you need to send Geoff to somewhere else where his obvious intellect will be challenged and developed. So I then went to a school for partially sighted children near Coventry, or
Okay.
on the outskirts of Coventry. And I stayed there from 1970 until 1979 when I did my O levels, which is what we used to call GCSEs back in the
Yes.
day. And then by the end of doing my O levels, I didn't stay on to the sixth form because I was beginning to be a bit of a rebel and I was sort of hitting up against authority. So I went to my local FE college to do my A levels.
Okay. Okay. And then when you went to your local college, did you need special help or equipment, or you just went in and did it?
I just went in and did it.
Goodness, incredible. So how did you write and do all that with your with your hands?
Yeah, I mean, I just would lean down on the desk and get writing, you know. It, I think the thing is, Humphrey, my parents always brought me up to believe that I had to make my own way in the world, and the only way for me to make my way in the world was to use my brain. You know, I was never going to be a carpenter or a bricklayer or
Right.
a painter and decorator or a car mechanic, but I could do an awful lot with my brain. So I just got on with it as best I could.
Incredible. And so were you, when you went to this sort of mainstream schools, were you classified disabled? I mean, how did they treat you? Or you just walked into the class and sat down with everybody else?
I just walked into the class and sat down with everybody else.
Yeah.
By the time I got to university, there was a little interregnum between doing my A levels and going to uni. I didn't go to uni till I was 22. But by then, they said the lovely people at Loughborough said, "Is there anything you want?" And I said, "Well, can't really see the overhead projector, and I know you use an awful lot of those. Could I have a photocopy of anything you put up on the OHP?" And they said, "No problem." And
Yeah.
that's what they did.
Yeah.
And they said, "Anything else you need?" And I said, "Well, I use talking books because reading for me, I can read, of course, but it's quite tiring to read lots and lots and lots of print.
Mm.
So I use the RNIB student talking book library.
Yeah.
And of course, that made a noise. And they gave me a little office, which they called a carrel. They gave me a carrel in the library. So I had unlike any other student, I had a little, or any undergraduate student, I had a little tiny office with a desk and a chair, and I could plug in my talking book machine and listen to talking books.
Oh goodness! Of course, and that was before they had audio books that we all listen to now in the car. And that was before the. And so you did your university degree. What did you study there?
I did French and political science.
French and political science, and then it was time to look for a job. How does that work?
Well, good question. I remember going to my local newspaper, to the Leicester Mercury, and I sat down with the managing editor, and he said, "Well, look, of course, with the best of will in the world, we couldn't really give you a job." And I said, "Well, why is that then?" He said, "Well, because you can't climb a ladder." And I said, "Well, sorry, but I'm not applying to be a window cleaner. I'm applying to be a journalist here." He couldn't see beyond my impairment, in other words.
Yeah.
But I luckily I met the news editor at my local BBC station, Radio Leicester, and he said, "Come in, do some work experience, and let's talk." And that's how I got introduced to other people in the BBC. And I applied to be a local radio trainee reporter, and the BBC came back to me and said, "Oh yes, you're just the kind of person we need. You're quick, you're bright, you know one end of a story from another. But the thing is, you see, in local radio, a reporter's a big resource, and if you can't drive,
Yeah.
we can't really give you a job." And now my friend Hugh, who was the local radio news editor, said, "Well, they do kind of have a point, but I don't think that's very fair." So he introduced me to people at Broadcasting House, who then sort of pointed me in other directions, and I applied for a traineeship,
Oh, and you got it.
and I did get it.
Yeah. So Broadcasting House was the BBC headquarters in London. That the battleship, they call it the battleship thing. So you were in a much bigger pool there, as it were, where they could apply your talents.
Exactly. I started in the newsroom there, Humphrey.
Yes, yes, I think I did too. You're
Yeah,
a little later than me, probably, but you also had a dual track career aspiration, didn't you?
I did. Because I wasn't sure that I could get into anywhere as a journalist, and because in the last year of university, we had a talk from somebody in the University Career Service about the sorts of jobs you can get if you've got a foreign language degree. One of the options he mentioned was the diplomatic service. And then he said, but there are two intakes. There's the regular intake and there's the fast stream intake. Please don't waste your time going to the fast stream intake because nobody from this university has ever succeeded. And it made me so angry that you could reduce people's expectations, it just so dismissively, that I applied and I went through all the various stages of selection and I got in. In fact, I had my final board for the BBC selection panel, or board as we used to call them, for the BBC in the afternoon of the same day as I'd had the final board for selection at the diplomatic service in the morning.
Goodness, so you were in Whitehall in the morning and then up at the Broadcasting House in the afternoon.
Taxi over to Broadcasting House after Whitehall, yes.
and
amazingly, they both offered me a place.
It's brilliant. And what year are we in now? We're the early 70s, are we? Mid 70s?
No, we're up to 1989.
89, sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, late 89. And that's when you came. But you chose journalism. Why was that? Because you can be so lippy against authority?
I think so. I read a lot of sort of people's memoirs and just sort of informed myself about life in the Foreign Office and in embassies abroad. And I thought, it's got that sort of reek of boarding school conformity about it. Don't speak out of turn, make sure you address everybody in the correct way. And then on the other hand, the BBC, where creativity and rebelliousness within certain limits was actually actively encouraged. Yeah. And I thought, where would I thrive? I would thrive much better in the sort of environment where I could give vent to my passion rather than having to be a sort of a conformist, I think.
Yes, and you were a news junkie from the age of 5, you said anyway. So you just loved the gossip and the stories and that sort of thing. I mean, you did these. You worked your way up, and we worked together. Maybe it was 30 years ago or so when you were editing Today and From Our Own Correspondent, that sort of thing. But then you went on to be the disability correspondent, didn't you? So you were actually reporting from your position on that world. How did you find that?
It's interesting because when I joined the BBC, especially having had that experience of trying to be a local radio trainee reporter and being told I couldn't get in because I couldn't drive, I thought to myself, well, the only way I can survive in this environment is to play down the disability. And so when anybody said to me, is there anything you need? I would say no. And I would say no in such a way that I would make them feel awkward for even asking, which wasn't very nice, really. But that was the way. That was my survival technique. And I spent years and years, using a desk at the normal height and having to bend right over and bending over tape, reel-to-reel tape machines and cutting 1/4-inch tape as we used to do back then. Mm-hmm. And I remember one day I was sitting in the office of The World Tonight, and our mutual friend Malcolm Brabant just walked down the corridor, and he poked his head in the door and he said, Geoff, you do realize that you're actually going to wreck your back doing that, don't you? And I think I sent him off with a flea in his ear and a couple of expletives. And then 6 months later, I had a really major disc prolapse in my lumbar spine. I was in huge pain for about 11 months. And in the end, I had to have spinal surgery, which was horrible. And then I had to have 6 months convalescence before I could go back to work. And the physios at the hospital said to me, Geoff, did you enjoy what you've just been through? And I said, well, no, of course I didn't. And they said, well, we want to tell you that unless you change things radically about the way you work, we will see you back here quite soon. And I went to the BBC and I said, look, by the way, I'm disabled. And they said, yeah, we knew that. It's just you that didn't know that. And I said, but I need all this stuff. I need a desk that goes up and down. I need a large screen monitor. I need a different kind of mouse for the computer. And they just said, just tell us what you want. We'll get it for you. not a problem. They always would have done that. It was just me. So I had this light bulb moment, this road to Damascus, when suddenly I realized, okay, you can't keep going on. You can't keep ignoring your you're ignoring your disability got you through the door, but it's not going to take you through your career. You now need to say, okay, in order to be the best I can be, I need some adjustments. And so I didn't really identify as disabled at the beginning of my BBC career. I didn't want anything to do with disability at the beginning of my career. And then I ended my BBC career spending 8 years looking at disability affairs and reporting on that. So yes, a complete about turn, really.
And that road to Damascus moment, that was a work thing, but what changed inside you then? Did your whole outlook to the world, you were talking about identity, did your identity change?
Well, I think it did. I mean, somebody sat me down and explained to me a concept called the social model of disability, which says, disabled people are not problems. It's the environment in which they live that are the problems. So, somebody in a wheelchair, somebody who's a wheelchair user doesn't have a problem as long as they don't have any stairs, to get to their work or to get on public transport or in their home. So it's the environment that disables people. And what clicked in my head was, okay, I no longer have to apologize for who and what I am. I no longer have to try and hide it. I can just say, look, this is who I am, and this is what I need to take me through my life. And it's crucially, it's not my fault. I think a lot of disabled people go through life thinking they have to play, especially people with hidden impairments. A lot of people go through life trying to sort of hide it, whether it's dyslexia or deafness or some kind of invisible thing. They won't come out as disabled because they think it's some kind of weakness. And I think I was also in that ridiculous camp of feeling that it was a weakness until I hit the buffers.
How and then and this sort of coincided with you becoming, or you later became, the disability correspondent there, and you had this new paradigm, I suppose is the word for it. How did the general attitudes in the wider world toward disability change in that 8 years that you covered that beat?
I think it was an incredibly interesting time to be covering that beat because in 2004, we got the final stage of implementation of the Disability Discrimination Act, which was first enacted in 1995. So suddenly businesses, service providers, religious institutions, all were having to make what the law called reasonable adjustments for disabled people, whether it's printing a large print menu or putting a ramp where there's a set of stairs up to a church, doesn't matter what it is. So going through all of that, and the Blair government in 2005 produced a report called Improving the Life Chances of Disabled People. And this was quite revolutionary, radical thinking. It was basically saying, what do we need to do over the next 20 years to remove the barriers to being including disabled people so that they can become full and active citizens in society. So it was an incredibly interesting time to be around all that. There was a lot of very interesting new thinking. And, there was all of that going on. Of course, I also got news editors saying to me, oh, what about this guy who's, climbing Everest and he's lost his leg and he's raising money for charity? And I would always say, look, that's a stunt. Good luck to him. But that doesn't actually, I always said to them, look, I want to report on things that affect hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. So in other words, new regulations that mean that airports have to become fully accessible. Good luck to the person that's going down Everest on a tin tray with one leg or whatever it is, but that doesn't actually affect anybody else at all very much.
Yes, and the little bit of money that's raised. But did the cultural attitudes change in that decade, say, and or through your life you've experienced it? Because Jean Joyce reminding her, she said attitudes to disability were terrible in the 50s and 60s. What are they like now, Jean? Tell us what you think. How much would that change from the moment, say, you walked into that boarding school to us sitting here now?
I mean, I think the difference over my lifetime from being a kid aged 5 to being an old buffer of 60 as I am now, I think it's changed monument. It never changes quickly enough for disability rights campaigners. Of course, we're impatient, like women are impatient, like LGBTQ people are impatient for equality, of course, and we need to keep pushing for equality. But if you compare then with now, it's chalk and cheese. I mean, there is an assumption now that disabled people can achieve, that they can enter the world of work, that they can obtain certificated academic qualifications, that they can be professors or lawyers or doctors or whoever. That those and it's the attitudinal barriers that really have changed more than even removing the stairs and putting in ramps and lifts. It's the perception that this person is living with an impairment or a set of impairments, but that shouldn't prevent them from achieving their potential. I think that's what's changed, and it's changed here. It's changed in the USA. It's changed in parts of Europe. But I've been to other parts of the world. China, for example.
Rwanda, China, Thailand. You're teaching journalists. What happens when you get off the plane and they meet you? What and they see you as you are? What is their attitude there?
I think actually, when I was running my journal media development project in Rwanda, which I did for 2 years from '99 until 2001, it was probably the first time in my life where the color of my skin mattered more than my impairments. So, in East Africa, I don't know if you've been on the East Africa beat. Have you, Humphrey?
Yes, I've been to Rwanda and Kenya.
Do you know the word Mzungu?
No, remind us.
Mzungu is a Kiswahili word meaning white man.
Yes.
And so people would point at you in the street and say, "Oh, Mzungu, Mzungu." Yeah. And the fact that I was a Mzungu for them mattered more than that I was missing most of my arms and an eye and had rubbish vision in the other eye. Yeah. That my defining characteristic was that I was a white man. And, it's a very old and colonial sort of attitude, but here's the white man come to sort of preach the gospel to us.
Yes, that's and they were in China and Thailand, in Asia, similar, or what did you find there?
As you know, people in China and Thailand are endlessly polite. I think I won them over, shall I say that? I think that at the beginning there was a sort of, oh well, how is this man with funny arms and funny eyes? How is he here to impart skills to us? What can he tell us? But I think you just win them over. You just demonstrate that you're in command of your subject, and pretty soon it goes away. I remember the Bangkok Post, I think it was, did quite a big feature on me, and that was quite good fun.
Right, and so when you do this, particularly, you say you have to win them over. Does it ever cross your, oh my God, I have to keep doing this? All of my life I've got to do this. How does that impact on you?
I think there is an element, and a lot of disabled people would agree with this. There is an element of having to be an ambassador for disability all the time. And to be honest with you, I don't mind. I actually don't mind that. Sometimes it's when you've had a really bad day and you're exhausted, it can grate a little bit. But otherwise you just think, well, okay, if I send that person away with a slightly different take on life or a slightly different take on disability, then they'll tell their friend in the pub, and that this is how we affect change. We affect change by example. I remember I was in my local health club and I was swimming, and I just got to the end of my swim, got out of the pool, and I think I was fiddling about with some bag with my with a towel and something else on the side of the pool, and a little boy came up to me about 8 years old, and he said, "Excuse me, but can I help you in any way?" And I said, "No, son, you can't. I'm all right." But I said, don't ever stop asking people, because that's really important.
Yeah, Yeah. So he cared. I mean, he saw you and cared. Yeah.
Yeah, and I didn't want to destroy that by saying, no,
Yes.
you can't,
Which
go
which is
away.
which is the sort of thing you said say to Malcolm Brabant when he came past. So your own attitudes have changed, Geoff.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I'm a better person now than I was, that's for sure. I'm a lot less angry.
A lot, yes. Jean Joyce says attitudes, and Jean Joyce mentioned the disability in the 50s and 60s. Attitudes are much better. I'm not disabled now, but was as a child. I spent a lot of time in hospital, saw very little of my parents, and went to school on a bus with one leg or the other in a plaster cast, then walked across town to school. That sort of thing resonate with you, Geoff?
It certainly does. It
Yeah.
certainly does. And I think now, um, people, disabled people expect a bit more as well. We ourselves, as disabled people, have higher expectations from life.
Mm.
I
How
think
would
that's
you
huge.
how would you describe it? Because you mentioned the other, I don't know what you call them, groups like LGBT and that sort of thing, all who want to push for change in their direction. Is it a battle? Is it an argument? Is it winning people over? What's the best way to look at it?
It's interesting because I think there is a spectrum in the equality world, and if you put, let's say, gender at the front, and then race, ethnic origin, and then sexual orientation, LGBTQ, and then disability. I think disability quite often, when you bring everybody together under one umbrella, I think disability tends to be perceived as more problematic because it's not just about removing attitudinal barriers. It's about removing other barriers, or providing different kinds of support, or creating bigger parking spaces, or creating bigger bathroom facilities. More is required. And I think disabled people sometimes in the equality world feel a little bit on the back foot in that
Yes,
sense.
yes.
Yeah.
Of course, there are those a couple of times our colleague Frank Gardner has told the stories about how he's just left on a plane at the end and they don't bring the wheelchair to him to get off. And this is as we are speaking now. So these attitudes need a bit of clipping, let's say, to put them in the right direction. I want to talk about your current campaigns, because there are thalidomide survivors, and is there a trust? Are you still raising money? What is going on there?
There's a trust which was set up in 1973 to distribute some of the monies that came from distillers and now come from Diageo and from the UK health departments in the UK nations. And so all of us thalidomiders have a sort of an annual grant from which we can draw money. And then there is a society, the Thalidomide Society, which was founded by our parents as a sort of mutual support group back in the early 60s. And that's still going strong as well. And that has much more of a sense of community and mutual support and keeping in touch with each other. We had our 60th anniversary celebration in May this year, in fact. Yes. And I couldn't believe how many people were comparing hip replacements. Because
we're all of that age.
because unlike other disabilities, we are a cohort, all within a sort of very narrow band of about 3 or 4 years. Yes. So we're all going through life challenges, whether it's acquiring a driving license, getting your first girlfriend, getting your first job, having kids, becoming a grandparent. We all hit those markers at the same time. And it seemed to me at this particular event that hip replacements were the order of the day. They were the new handbags.
And are you very close to some of them, because you would have gone through those rites of passage, as it were, now what, for 40, 50, 60 years?
We are an incredibly close-knit community with all the advantages and disadvantages that brings. I mean, sometimes with people that you know very well, you perhaps feel more at liberty to be a bit rude and scathing of them than people that you don't know very well. On the other hand, if one of us is in trouble, you'll see a very positive sort of pile on where people say, let me help, or have you thought of this, or I could lend you that. So there's a lot of community support among thalidomide survivors, not just in the UK, but in the world. And I have to say, Harry Evans, until his death in 2020,
the editor of the Sunday Times,
editor of the Sunday Times, he was never done with thalidomide. Tina Brown, I interviewed Tina for the anniversary celebration. Yeah, she couldn't make it to the event, but we did an interview over Zoom, much like this one. And she said Harry was never done with thalidomide. He helped the Canadians. He would have now been helping the Americans who are trying to get recognized. And he said he always felt like, he wanted to support you in any way he could. And he was the patron of the society until his death. And we were very proud to have him as patron.
Yes. And when you were in China and Thailand and Rwanda and other places, were there thalidomide communities there, or did the drug not get that far?
There were people with limb impairments, and they may or may not have been caused by some kind of medication. But no, thalidomide got to Brazil, and it got to Brazil to treat leprosy. And there was a second and a third wave of thalidomide babies in Brazil. I remember in 2009, I went to a World Thalidomide Congress in Sao Paulo, and I held in my hands a little thalidomide baby who was, I don't know, 6 months old or so. And it was, of course, I was very, as you do when you hold a baby, you're very happy to hold a baby. And, and it was smiling and gurgling and, a lovely little boy. But at the same time, I looked at him and I thought, this didn't need to happen. We knew by now, what would happen if the mother took thalidomide, and I think that's a source of ongoing regret and some degree of anger that these kids are still being damaged.
Yes, and just your campaigns that you're doing. What do you now want? Or what are you now campaigning for?
Well, we would like the German government and Grunenthal, which is a privately owned company owned by the Wirtz family, they have never properly apologized, properly acknowledged their corporate malfeasance in the past. And the German government have never acknowledged, for example, that they assisted and protected by laws that company. We want the German government and Grunenthal to, as it were, fess up. It's not really about money. It's about them acknowledging the damage that they've done.
Yes, no, I think that is important, isn't it? Thinking that people can get away with it, because if they get away with it, they'll get away with it on something else, won't they?
Well, I mean, there is a precedent as well, isn't there? The German government very recently apologized for the botched way in which it dealt with the 1972 hostage taking at the Munich Olympics.
Yes.
That was several decades ago. Yeah. But the German government did an awful lot to protect that family and to protect that company. Yeah. I can only assume that in the post-war dash for growth in Germany, the dash for reconstruction and growth meant that things like thalidomide were just collateral damage. The juggernaut would go on, even though a few people got crushed under the wheels.
Yes. Collateral damage is a good phrase. Wait there, Geoff. Don't go away, because I just need to tell our wonderful audience what is coming up in the next few days at our next Purpose, Passion and Grit, which is on October the 4th. That's a week from now. Rosie Stancer, our very own Goldster PPG presenter, will be telling all of you and Adam Williams, who is the Goldster executive producer, about her upcoming exploration trek across the Sinai Desert. That's an expedition that Goldster will be tracking from beginning to end, and the end is at the COP27 Climate Change Summit in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt in early November. Get involved with Rosie and her adventure. October the 11th, Lucinda is with Denise McCann, a life coach in applied positive psychology, on the midlife, potential, identity, and how to create a future of meaning and fulfillment, which I'm going to ask you about in a second, Geoff. And then you will meet Lucinda this week on Thursday on Inside Story, when she is with the great travel writer Andrew Eames on the 8:55 to Baghdad, part of our Agatha Christie themed month. And on Friday, Lucinda talks to everyone in the book club, Agatha Christie's Appointment with Death. Have a look at it, read it, join in the conversation. Before I forget, Geoff, tell us about your podcast and your book.
Well, I can talk much more about my podcast because it's real and it's happening, whereas my book is still, as it were, partly in my head and not committed yet even to the computer. The podcast is called Escapodyssey. It's a sort of combination of the word escape and odyssey, obviously. And I'm doing it with my lovely wife, Dawn. And it's really us sharing our travels and our adventures and lessons that we learn from them. And it's just an opportunity for us to be creative and have a bit of fun with the medium of, I know it's podcasting, but really it's radio, isn't it?
It's radio, yes.
We're making radio, and I'm never happier than when I'm dealing with music and sound effects and, mixing things and goodness knows what. I kind of miss a bit of that. So that's an opportunity to give people a sound-rich experience and to hopefully inspire them to discover parts of the world that they may not have thought of discovering. So that's Escapodyssey. It's coming up soon, and people can follow at Escapodyssey on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram.
I've got it. I just put it up on the chat.
Oh, well done. Thank you, Humphrey.
To look at that. That's the Twitter handle that we put up there.
Lovely.
Yes. Yeah.
The book, working title, Making Lemonade. Why that working title? Because the radio critic of the Observer back in the early 2000s was a lady called Sue Arnold. And she reviewed a series that I did for BBC World Service called Being Different, when I went around went around the world and interviewed different disabled people, and we compared notes on what is it like to be a disabled member of parliament in Uganda, for example. And she said at the end of her review, she said, "But the thing I like most about this program is the presenter himself. Life handed him a lemon, and he chose to make lemonade." And I thought, yeah, that kind of does sum up a lot of my positivity.
Yes.
And so that's the working title. I've written 7 chapters. I've got about another 11 or 12 to write. And I wish I would just stop talking about it and get on and do it.
When are we likely to see it then? Next year?
I would say next year, if you're lucky, 2024 more likely.
2024 more. There's one element you come from that. Give him a lemon, he makes lemonade. We've got Denise McCann, I mentioned just now, coming up on our PPG show. And this thing about when people talk about identity, fulfillment, the meaning of life, we're getting a lot of it now about how people are struggling with all these things. When you read or hear about this, given what you've been through from the moment you went to that boarding school, what do you think? Do you think just make the lemonade? I mean, or do you think, there are real problems?
Well, there are real problems, but sometimes making the lemonade is the solution. Somebody once asked me what I would like to have written on my tombstone. And I thought about it for a second. And I said, he never stopped trying. He never gave up.
Yeah.
And I think that's for me, the important life lesson from my own life is don't stop trying. The minute you stop trying, Harry Evans said that to me. He said, the minute you stop with a campaign is the minute it's about to succeed. And a lot of newspaper campaigns, don't succeed because just at the point where they're about to make a difference, the editor says, "Oh, forget all that. Let's do something else." So don't stop trying. Never give up. Keep going on.
Yeah.
As Alan Bennett would say, keep on keeping on.
Keep on keeping on. Keep on making lemonade. I just love that. You give him a lemon, you make lemonade. Geoff, thank you so much. Our hour has gone so quickly, and what a discussion we've had, and what a story you've told us. And thank you for telling us. It really is very, very special. Thank you all for taking part. Thank you, Jean Joyce, for your. Jean Joyce says I agree. Keep on making lemonade. Thank you so much for that, for those comments there. Until Thursday with Lucinda, stay curious, stay active, keep climbing those mountains, keep making the lemonade, stay safe, and of course, stay Goldster. Tell your friends, families, even your enemies about us so that we can grow. And thank you particularly, Geoff Adams Spink. I look forward to seeing you in 2023 or 2024 on this show with your book. And maybe we'll review your podcast when it comes out, but we'll definitely give it a listen. But until then, Geoff, thanks so much. Bye.
Thanks for having me. Goodbye.